we will never come out on top if we accept advice from soundbite salesmen and carnival barkers who pretend the most powerful country on earth can remain great by looking inward and hiding behind walls at a time that technology has made that impossible to do and unwise to even attempt. And I think that everyone here, especially the class of 2016, understands that viscerally, internally, intellectually. You're about to graduate into a complex and borderless world.
Secretary of State John Kerry at Northeastern University delivering the commencement address, telling graduates there they will be, quote, entering a borderless world. That's exactly how it will be if the Obama administration gets its way, with illegals pouring into our nation in record numbers and the president insisting that without proper vetting, let's just bring in 10,000 Syrian refugees this year. For more, let's welcome in two gents who know whereof they speak on this issue. First, via Skype from Washington, D.C., the president of the Federation for American Immigration Reform, or FAIR, Dan Stein, and from Miami, via Skype, writer, commentator, and community activist Raul Mas. We thank you both for your time here tonight on Newsmax Prime. And gentlemen, politics and policy go hand in glove. A new Rasmussen Reports poll shows Americans continue to be reluctant about allowing Syrian refugees into the country. Here's the way it stacks up: 59% against, 10% undecided, only 31% in favor. Dan Stein, you add to that the insistence of this administration to basically get rid of any thorough vetting process, and you've got a prescription for real national security problems.
Hi, JD. Nice to be with you. Well, look, it's a basic problem when you have an administration that leads with ideology and doesn't look at the facts or reality. Anybody looking at what's happening in the EU, the European Union, can see that they're putting up barriers. Nation states matter. The history books tell us that nations that don't or won't control their borders don't last very long, and that while it's true that communications and travel are easier now than they've ever been before, the nation state, as Donald Trump has reminded us, is still the most viable way by which nations get things done. People do not want to see an uncontrolled massive influx of people coming from any part of the world, certainly not from the Middle East. And frankly, what you got right now is a perfect setup in this political campaign, because Kerry, Clinton, Obama, I mean, they all have the same line, the old narrative now, which is everybody around the world who wants to go someplace else should be able to come here, and borders don't need to be enforced. And Donald Trump has laid out an immigration.
You know, it's interesting. You mentioned that, Dan Stein, and while you were speaking, we were looking at images of what's been going on in the European Union, where we think some of the terrorists let in came claiming to be refugees. But speaking of Donald Trump, and Raul, I want you to listen to this and then react to it. Trump was on the stump in Washington State over the weekend, and he was stating something that, despite all these people saying he's outrageous, a lot of people agree with, about not letting these people in unvetted. Here's the Donald from over the weekend.
They have no paperwork, they have no documentation, they have no anything. And you know what? We should take care of them. I'll get the Gulf states that have so much money, you wouldn't believe it. I'm good at getting people to put up money. Believe me, they'll put up money. And we build safe zones in Syria. We don't want them here. We don't know who they are.
Well, he's offering a solution right there, Raul, not just complaining about it, saying there need to be safe zones right there in the Middle East. Your take on that?
Yeah, listen, I mean, I think it makes perfect sense, right? I mean, when you look at Syria, you look at the entire Middle East, it's basically sort of not just a failed state, but a failed region. I mean, the country itself has been in a civil war now for years and years. It's practically in rubble. I mean, how can you possibly vet individuals coming from that part of the world? I mean, who are you going to rely on? The Syrian sort of secret police to tell you whether they're ISIS or not ISIS? I mean, come on, let's be real here. I mean, it's just it's beyond sort of stupid to sort of think that somehow you're going to be able to vet these individuals. And quite frankly, a lot of that holds true for Central America as well. You know, in a lot of the countries in Central America, south of Mexico, Honduras, Guatemala, you're dealing with countries that are basically at this point failed states that are, you know, firmly in the hands of the narco-terrorists. And you really can't depend on the governments down there to be telling you the truth in terms of who's coming across the border.
But Raul, you mentioned that term, narco-terrorists. We've got a caller on the line, Bobby, checking in from Pueblo, Colorado. And Bobby, I understand you're concerned about illegal immigration and the trafficking of heroin.
Yes, sir. We have a horrible, horrible saturation of drugs here in our city, and it's coming from the borders. And we not only do we have heroin here that is so rampant, and we have now the recreational marijuana that's supposedly legal. We have 19 within the last month and a half illegal grows in our state that the county sheriff has completely taken over and cut them back from growing illegal pot here. So it's a gateway drug, and it's...
Well, you know, it's interesting, Bobby, because we heard when pot was legalized, that would take away all the black market.
It hasn't, sir. It has made it worse. And we have the environment around here has gone horribly bad for our children, for our families, our communities, and we have the cartel here in our town. It's not even that big of a city, but we have the cartel from Mexico coming in here, taking over our city, taking over our children.
Well, let me ask you about that. I want to find out something more from you, Bobby. When you say the cartel, do you mean lawbreakers? Do you mean organized crime?
Yes,
illegals
sir.
from Mexico showing up right there in Pueblo, Colorado?
Yes, sir. And they have the guns and the ammunition to fight our sheriff's department, who are doing an awesome job trying to protect us, but they don't have the equipment that these people are bringing over here. They are just saturating our city. We have more deaths and more violence in our small town. If you checked into it, you would be amazed.
Well, let me just ask you this way. Apart from the statistics, what about your situation at your house, Bobby? Are you afraid for yourself and your kids?
Yes, sir, I am. I live in a small community, and I'm telling you, we have had, like I said, 19 illegal busts for pot from people from Florida, from Cuba, all over the place that are coming here to grow illegal grows in our small town, because it's easier to try to overlook them because it's so-called legal here now, and they're getting away with it.
Bobby, we thank you for your perspective right there, and very passionate, and I appreciate it. Let me turn to Dan Stein, because Dan, she's talking about the cartel, and there have been recent accounts, and I wrote about it in my book 10 years ago, the connection, perhaps inevitable, between the narco-terrorists on our border and the Islamic terrorists overseas coming in and cooperating with those who are part of the cartel. Got about a minute 30 left in this segment. Dan, how concerned are you about that?
Well, every American should be concerned. This administration has basically destroyed our border controls and our immigration enforcement. And people who think the opioid epidemic is only diverted prescription drugs need to understand a lot of these are coming in from Mexico, China through Mexico. These cartels are trafficking international drugs and illegal immigrants across the border. And everything this administration has been doing has been trying to make it easier for that to happen. And it's a national tragedy what's happening across the country.
Let me turn to Raul Mas. And Raul, not to bring up unpleasant subjects, but you think back, 30 years ago in Miami and in South Florida with the epidemic of drugs. Are you surprised to hear Bobby talk about Pueblo, Colorado, and the legalization of pot being a major problem? About 30 seconds.
Not in the least. Not in the least. Listen, one of the advantages of being down here in South Florida is we kind of have a feel for what's going on directly south of our border. U.S. Southern Command is based here, basically helping, try and maintain that security south of the border. And I can tell you, I've been on several trips to Central America. In fact, some of them sponsored by Southcom. And you see what's happening in some of those countries and the effect that the drug trade, it's just huge sums of money that have completely corrupted most of the governments in Central America. And quite frankly, they have everybody in their pocket, the politicians, the judges, the police, name it.
Yep, we'll have to stop it right there. We're going to continue the conversation after the break. Our thanks to Bobby for her unvarnished analysis of life in Pueblo, Colorado. There's more ahead after this.
I will fight for comprehensive immigration reform and a path to citizenship for you and for your families across our country. I will fight to stop partisan attacks on the executive actions that would put dreamers, including those with us today, at risk of deportation. And if Congress continues to refuse to act, as president, I would do everything possible under the law to go even further.
Yeah, Hillary Clinton all in for illegals. Surprise, surprise. Trying to build up that leftist vote. Speaking of votes on the left, got an update on numbers for you. West Virginia now being called by various news agencies in favor of Bernie Sanders by a 50-39 margin. He's projected as the winner. The Vermont self-described Democratic Socialist defeating Hillary Clinton there in West Virginia. Meantime, some readjustment of the reporting that we received from Nebraska earlier tonight. The Associated Press, and we apologize for numbers that apparently were in error during our first hour, but the Associated Press reports with 11% of the vote in Nebraska, Hillary Clinton with a substantial lead early yet, but a 61-39 margin over Bernie Sanders. Well, don't be confused about this. It has everything to do with votes. Hillary ain't reaching out to illegals because of some sort of compassion. She's looking to build a leftist state, basically to guarantee Democrat control for years to come by essentially taking citizenship and what it means to be a citizen and diluting it. Something we need to talk about now with our panel. Joining us via Skype from Washington, D.C., the president for the Federation for American Immigration Reform. We call it FAIR for short, and we call the gentleman with us Dan Stein. And from Miami, writer, commentator, and community activist Raul Mas. Raul, first to you. Especially there has been some disagreement within the Republican ranks about, quote, comprehensive immigration reform. But there's no doubt Hillary ain't doing this for compassion. She's looking at this in terms of future votes, is she not?
Absolutely. And in fact, it's the same thing that we saw also in Virginia, with now allowing sort of, changing state law that, previously prohibited, those with criminal convictions from voting. Now they can vote. I mean, the Democrats will do everything that it takes to basically sway the elections in their favor. And yes, immigrants historically have voted in favor of Democrats as opposed to Republicans. So of course, anytime you make it easier for immigrants to become U.S. citizens, chances are they are going to vote with the Democratic Party. So it's absolutely a political play. I don't see how anybody cannot, acknowledge that. Look, we have some enormous problems in our immigration system, but we can't also deny the reality of what's going on in the political arena in terms of, trying to move the needle in favor of easier citizenship or an easier path to American citizenship, not because of some, moral high ground, but rather because it's politically convenient.
Well, let me turn to Dan Stein. And Dan, maybe we need to take our cues from Europe. And of course, we've had a massive influx over the last 30 years of illegals, not immigrants, illegal aliens coming to this shore. But you take a look at what has transpired in London in terms of, quote, lawful immigration and the changes there and the election of a new mayor. My question is this, Dan, don't the Democrats care about the future of the country? Are they just looking to permanently ensconce themselves in power?
Power corrupts, absolutely, as people have always said. Recognize, JD, that Hillary Clinton is not just talking about amnesty for people here now. She's talking about future flow, anarchy, people coming into the country from all over, legally, illegally, doesn't matter, virtually without limit. And that's something very different from what she was talking about in 1993 when Bill was president. This is a radical change in the Democrat Party position. And what people need to understand is it's not just about her wanting to give green cards and citizenship to people who broke our laws in the last 20 years. She's talking about virtually unenforced immigration controls and limits, future flow without limit. What we've been doing for the last 30 years is not typical of the American tradition. We have massive immigration, legal, illegal, from all over the world. It's accelerating. We need to take a break. We need to limit immigration substantially for several decades to catch our breath and figure out where we're going and absorb and assimilate the people we brought in.
Well, I'll tell you where we're going next. We're going to go back to the telephones at 1-877-Newsmax. A caller from Florida, from Ormond, Florida to be exact. Phil is on the line. Phil, welcome to Newsmax Prime.
Thanks for having me on, JD.
You bet.
All right. Yeah, I just wanted to say, you know, Donald Trump caught a lot of flack for saying that there are drug dealers coming across the southern border, and there are rapists, and there are murderers. I mean, there are those people coming across the border, and there's no doubt about it, although the mainstream press tended to spin it that he was saying they are. The only time he said they are in that whole speech was when he was saying he was questioning whether the Mexican government was doing it on purpose, you know, rhetorically. So I don't, you know, this idea that he's racist is totally out of pace with reality. And another thing about immigration in general, in my opinion, is that a lot of Sharia, when you sit down and look at it, it doesn't mesh with our Constitution and our beliefs as a country.
Well, and the other thing that's missed in all of this is the notion of assimilation. But listen, Phil, we very much appreciate your call. And I want to get back to the phone lines at 1-877-Newsmax. Going back to Cincinnati the second time tonight, this time for Larry. Hi, Larry.
Hi, how are you?
Okay, sir. Your take on all this.
Well, I just had a question. I hear people say, Republicans talk also, that it's impossible to export or deport 15 million illegal aliens. Yet most of the left talks about how possible it is to deprive and, if necessary, arrest 120 million legal citizen gun holders.
Yeah, isn't that curious? Isn't that curious, Larry? Yeah, it's impossible to compassionately return people to their countries of origin. I don't use the word deport. I think it's far more compassionate to send them back home. And yet they talk about how they're going to seize guns and abridge the Second Amendment. Let me turn to Raul Mas on this. You hear what Larry had to say, but there has been a general notion, I used to fight it all the time in Washington, well, we can't do anything about the people who are already here. Raul, only about 2 minutes remain in the segment. Let me give a minute to you to talk about what Larry had to say.
Listen, I think if you look at the historical record, I think Eisenhower did, in fact, deport quite a number of illegal aliens, you know, back in the late 50s, early 60s. So it has been done before. But look, you know, part of the problem is that you're deporting people back, quite frankly, to a hellhole in many cases, because the drug dealers have so taken over their own countries, and the politicians of those countries are so corrupt that you really are sort of, you know, sending them back to hell, if you will. I mean, that's
yeah, but let me turn to Dan for his thoughts, because, you know, we heard Mr. Trump talk about safe zones around Syria, not bringing in the refugees. Shouldn't we expect that that people who are coming to this country, whether as refugees or as illegals trying to get here, shouldn't they take up the fight in their countries of origin? It may be tough there, but this notion that America welcomes everybody, I know Raul's not saying it, but where the left is taking it with this counterfeit compassion is really a little too much. Final 30 seconds to you, Dan.
Yeah, I mean, first, the left doesn't believe there are any limits to government power, so the idea that they couldn't deport people is nonsense. We have the ability, and we should get the job done. More importantly, though, people need to stay and improve their country. If everybody who wants to leave, you enable the despots, you enable the criminal syndicates to get control, consolidate control. One of the reasons why the Castros are still in power after all these years is that everybody who would have opposed them has come to Florida, come to the United States. And if it's one thing, you want to provide political protection for people who truly need it, who are in life-threatening situations, but you don't want to have your immigration policy undermine your foreign policy by encouraging everybody who would normally stay to try to fight for their country to just move.
To be continued. Dan Stein in Washington. Raul Mas, I know you got things to say, but I'm out of time. We're going to bring you back to talk about what happened with Cubans and the lessons to learn in Miami. Raul, we appreciate it. Dan, we appreciate it. And stick with us for a final word next.